There are moments in life when the past doesn't knock. It breaks the door down. The courtroom was quiet that morning, ordinary, routine, unremarkable. The kind of quiet that comes before a storm. No one could have predicted that today would become a reckoning. Not the jury, not the lawyers, not the camera crew huddled in the back row. And certainly not Judge Rachel Moore, who had handled hundreds of cases in that very room with the kind of composure that made headlines. But when the courtroom doors opened and the defendant was let in, everything she knew unraveled. His name was Malik Carter. But to her, he was so much more than that. He was laughter beneath a rusted-out sky. He was muddy sneakers and whispered dreams. He was the boy who once told her, "We'll get out of this town one day, sunshine. You'll see." Now, he stood before her in shackles. And just like that, the gavel in her hand felt heavier than ever. Rachel had spent her entire life playing by the rules. She believed in the law, in its promise of fairness, even when it cracked around the edges. But nothing in her textbooks, no case study, no courtroom precedent had prepared her for this. To see the boy she once loved like a brother accused of a crime that could steal the rest of his life. And what if he didn't do it? What if the truth had been buried, again, beneath bias, broken systems, and the invisible scars of growing up on the wrong side of everything? Because here's the thing no one tells you about justice. Sometimes it comes too late. Sometimes it wears a suit stitched with assumptions. And sometimes it looks a whole lot like revenge wearing a robe. As Rachel sits on the bench, her face unreadable, her mind is waging war. Between memory and responsibility. Between who Malik was and who the world insists he must be. But while the courtroom argues over fingerprints and surveillance footage, something else is unfolding. A deeper story. One written in crayon letters from a daughter he barely gets to hold. One spoken through the testimony of those society forgets. One that will test the limits of truth, forgiveness, and the courage it takes to do the right thing, even when the world expects you not to. This isn't just a courtroom drama. This is about the past catching up with the present. This is about two lives that took opposite paths, but were never truly apart. This is about what happens when the system puts the wrong man on trial, and the right woman has to decide if she'll finally speak up. Welcome to Black Footprints, where we dig deeper than headlines and tell the stories most people are too afraid to face. If this story moved you, even just a little, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Support stories that matter. Share this video, leave a comment, and join us as we shine a light into the corners where truth hides. Because stories like Malik's, they don't end in silence anymore. The courtroom had the same buzz it always did. Papers shuffling, murmurs from the gallery, the quiet clack of heels against polished floors. Judge Rachel Moore stepped onto the bench, robes flowing, posture poised, her expression unreadable. To the onlookers, it was just another day in court. For Rachel, it was routine, justice delivered with impartiality, emotion checked at the door. She sat, glanced over the docket, and exhaled softly. The state of Louisiana versus Malik Carter. The name meant nothing until the man in shackles was brought through the door. And just like that, her world fractured. Her breath caught. For a split second, she wasn't Judge Moore. She was 11 years old again, barefoot in a sunlit field, racing a boy with wide eyes and a crooked smile through tall summer grass. Malik Carter. She blinked, as if her eyes had played a cruel trick. But it was him, older, weathered, his frame heavier with the burden of time, life, and maybe something more. His shoulders slumped not just from the weight of the cuffs, but from a lifetime of disappointment. His face was lined rougher, but those eyes, those deep, unwavering eyes, held the same fire, just dimmed. He looked at her. Recognition, regret, maybe even hurt. And then, just like that, he looked away. Rachel gripped the edge of her bench so tightly her knuckles whitened. The gavel felt heavier than usual in her hand. Her voice, trained, practiced, almost faltered as she began the proceedings. "Mr. Carter," she said, trying to steady her tone, "you stand accused of assault and robbery. How do you plead?" His voice was low, gravelly, barely above a whisper. "Not guilty, Your Honor." It echoed louder than it should have. She nodded, signaling for the prosecution to begin. But her mind didn't follow the script. It was still back in that little Louisiana town where two kids from different sides of the tracks had dared to be friends in a world that never welcomed it. A world that whispered behind their backs and shouted when they got too close. She remembered his laugh, how he used to call her Sunshine, because her face always scrunched when she smiled. She remembered when they built a makeshift treehouse in the woods and swore they'd never let the world pull them apart. And yet here they were, one in a robe, the other in chains. Her pulse thudded in her ears as the prosecutor rattled off charges, timelines, evidence. None of it stuck. Not yet, because the courtroom no longer felt like a sanctuary of justice. It felt like a time machine, one that had brought the past screaming into the present. Rachel forced herself to focus, to breathe, to remember where she was. But beneath the surface, emotion churned like a storm. She had always believed in the law, its structure, its process, its promise. But sitting across from Malik, a man who once held her secrets and childhood dreams, she felt that belief shake for the first time in her life. Because this wasn't just a case. It was a reckoning, and it had only just begun. Before there was a courtroom, before the black robe, before the silence that now hung between them like a verdict waiting to be read. There were two kids on opposite sides of the railroad tracks, laughing like they had the world to themselves. Rachel Moore had grown up in the tidy part of Masonville, Louisiana. Her family's house stood behind a white picket fence with a trimmed lawn and Sunday dinners. Malik Carter's world was different. Dirt roads, peeling paint, and nights where the hum of crickets competed with police sirens. But none of that mattered when they were together. They met by accident, one summer afternoon by a creek that sliced between the neighborhoods like a quiet, stubborn boundary. Rachel had wandered too far from home. Malik was already there, bare feet in the water, holding a crooked fishing rod he'd built himself. She asked if he caught anything. He shrugged. Not yet. You want to try? That moment became the start of everything. They were inseparable after that. Summer after summer, they fished, climbed trees, played tag until dusk. At night, they'd lie on the hood of Malik's uncle's rusted-out car and stare at the stars, whispering dreams they couldn't tell anyone else. You ever think about leaving this place? Malik had asked one night, his voice soft beneath the sky. Somewhere people don't care who your daddy is or what color your skin is. Rachel had laughed, not because it was funny, but because it felt impossible. Where would we go? Anywhere, he said. Just somewhere different. Somewhere fair. They were kids, but they knew. Even then, they knew that Masonville wasn't built for their kind of friendship. Not in a town where black and white still meant more than just colors. People whispered. Rachel's mom clutched her pearls tighter every time she saw Malik's name scribbled in her daughter's notebook. The neighbors stopped waving, but Rachel didn't care. Not until the day her father came home early and saw them sitting on the porch, legs swinging side by side. Get inside, he barked, voice sharp as a whip. Rachel hesitated, glancing at Malik, who looked like he'd been punched in the gut. She waited for him to say something. He did, quietly. Go on, I'll see you around. But they didn't. That was the last time they spoke. Malik's family moved away not long after. Rachel poured herself into school, into perfection, in his silence. Her father never brought it up again. As if Malik had been a bad dream, she was expected to forget. What she didn't know, what no one told her, was that Malik had written to her. A letter, messy and hopeful, tucked in an envelope with her name in careful block letters. He'd slipped it in her mailbox the day they left town. But she never got it. Years later, she would find out the truth. Her mother had intercepted it, read it, and thrown it away. I did it to protect you, her mother had said, long after Rachel had become Judge Moore. You had a future. He didn't, but Malik had a future. Maybe not the one they had planned under those stars, but a future all the same. And now, sitting in her courtroom in shackles, he was no longer the boy who dreamed of escape. He was a man who had survived a life shaped by that severed bond. Rachel's fingers curled tightly beneath the bench. She didn't cry. Judges don't cry in court. But somewhere deep inside, a little girl was grieving the friendship that might have changed everything, if only that letter had reached her. There was a time when Rachel Moore and Malik Carter stood side by side, staring at the same stars, dreaming of the same escape. But life, as it so often does, carved two separate roads out of the same patch of earth, and those roads couldn't have looked more different. Rachel's path was paved, not without effort, but with every advantage that came from being born on the right side of town, into a family that believed in discipline, appearances, and the promise of the American dream. After high school, she earned a scholarship to Tulane. Law school followed, then clerkships, then the bench. She climbed with a fury in her bones, each step fueled by a silent vow to never be the girl with her father's disapproval hanging over her head again. And with every courtroom she entered, with every sentence she handed down, she believed, really believed, that justice, though imperfect, could be fair, that the law, when applied right, was a tool for change. Malik's path didn't have such lights to follow. After his family left Masonville, things spiraled. A new neighborhood, a struggling school system, a single mother juggling two jobs. And then one mistake, the kind that wouldn't have landed a rich white kid in jail, but for Malik, it marked the beginning of a lifelong battle. He was 16, accused of breaking into a liquor store. The evidence? A vague description from a frightened clerk. Tall, black, wore a hoodie. That was enough. There were no cameras, no fingerprints, just Malik in the wrong place at the wrong time, walking home from the bus stop. He swore he was innocent, but the public defender barely looked him in the eye. He was advised to take a plea. It's better than jail, they told him. Just admit it, and you'll be out in 6 months. He did, but that plea deal followed him like a shadow. It meant no scholarships. It meant no steady job offers. It meant every cop who stopped him already saw a record, not a person. And each time he tried to start over, the system nudged him back into the cracks. A fight outside a bar, loitering, unpaid tickets, sleeping on a park bench. It stacked up, small things, survivable things. But together, they became a story that made the world think they already knew him before he even opened his mouth. To the system, Malik Carter was a repeat offender. To Malik, the system was a noose that just kept tightening. Meanwhile, Rachel built a reputation as a no-nonsense judge with a sharp mind and a sharper tongue. She gave lectures on judicial ethics. She served on committees. She mentored law students, many of whom saw her as proof that the system could work for everyone. She told them, the law is blind. But now, as she looked across the courtroom at Malik, the man with a record that began with a lie and snowballed into a life of constant uphill battles, Rachel wasn't sure anymore. Because the law hadn't been blind when it first met Malik Carter. It had seen his skin, his zip code, his silence in the face of injustice. It had judged him long before any court did. And now here he was again, on trial, not just for the crime he was accused of, but for every sin the world had already assumed he'd committed. Rachel sat behind her bench, robe draped like armor, heart pounding like a drum. She had followed the rules, believed in the process. But somewhere along the line, Malik had been swallowed by it. And the question that haunted her now was the one she could no longer silence. What if the system she had sworn to uphold was the very thing that had destroyed him? The courtroom had grown colder, not in temperature, but in mood, the kind of cold that settles into the bones when doubt hangs heavy in the air. Judge Rachel Moore sat with her fingers lightly pressed together, watching the prosecutor rise to deliver his case against Malik Carter. The charges were serious: armed robbery, assault, resisting arrest. On paper, they painted a dangerous man, a repeat offender, a menace. But paper, Rachel had learned, doesn't carry weight. Faces do. Truth does. And right now, none of that felt as clear-cut as the prosecution wanted it to be. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the assistant district attorney began, his tone flat but forceful. On the evening of October 9th, Mr. Malik Carter entered a convenience store in Baton Rouge and violently attacked the clerk before fleeing the scene with the contents of the cash register. He gestured to the screen as a grainy surveillance video played. The footage showed a figure in a red hoodie, face obscured, moving quickly through the store. The quality was poor, blurry, full of static and shadows. The figure leapt the counter, scuffled with someone out of frame, then darted toward the door. That man, the prosecutor said, was the defendant. Rachel narrowed her eyes. Was it? The video could have been anyone. The resolution was so poor you could barely make out the shape of a face, let alone a clear identity. Yet the state was hanging its entire argument on that footage. No weapon had been recovered. No stolen cash was found in Malik's possession. No fingerprints matched. Just a vague description: black male, mid-40s, dark jeans, red hoodie, and a rushed arrest blocks away from the scene. Then came the defense. Erica Blake stood with quiet confidence. She wasn't loud, didn't rely on theatrics. But every word she spoke landed like a perfectly placed arrow. The prosecution wants you to believe this is open and shut, she began. But what you've seen is not a case built on facts. It's built on assumption. She turned to the jury, her voice steady. My client, Mr. Carter, was arrested based solely on proximity and a generic description. He wasn't wearing a red hoodie when he was found. In fact, he's never owned one. And the figure in that video? You couldn't identify them with certainty even if you wanted to. She paused, then walked over to the evidence table, where the so-called items of interest sat, none of which belonged to Malik. No fingerprints, no money, no weapon, just a man with a past, walking near the wrong place at the wrong time. Rachel watched Malik as Erica spoke. He didn't twitch, didn't flinch, just stared down at the table like he'd heard this song before and already knew how it ended. But then something stirred in her. A memory, fleeting but vivid. A few weeks ago, she had been leaving a grocery store downtown. Her handbag slipped from her shoulder, scattering papers and pens across the sidewalk. Before she could stoop to pick them up, a man, unkempt, tired-looking, with kind eyes, had bent down and helped her. He didn't ask for anything, just smiled and said, "You dropped your future, Judge." She remembered laughing at that, touched by the warmth in his voice. She'd thanked him, then watched him disappear into the crowd, not giving it a second thought. But now, as she looked at Malik more closely, she knew. That man had been him. Her throat tightened. He hadn't recognized her then, or maybe he had, and chose not to say anything. But he had helped her, silently, respectfully, with dignity. And now he sat in chains. Rachel's heart clenched as she turned her gaze back to the courtroom. The law demanded objectivity. But the truth? The truth was begging for attention. And the truth was this: something didn't add up. Not in the video. Not in the evidence. Not in a man who had once handed her a drop pen and now stood accused of a crime he might never have committed. This was no longer just about verdicts. It was about redemption. About how many chances the system gives and who it chooses to forgive. And the fight for that truth was only getting started. Judge Rachel Moore sat behind the bench like she always did, chin high, robe ironed to perfection, gavel within reach. To the world, she was the picture of composure. But inside, her mind was spinning like a coin tossed into the air, not yet landed, still uncertain which side it would fall on. The courtroom buzzed quietly around her. Legal arguments floated in and out of her ears like static, muffled by the storm raging behind her calm facade. She was trained for this, for pressure, for ambiguity, for parsing truth from noise. But no one had trained her for Malik Carter. How do you remain impartial when the man on trial once shared his dreams with you under a sky full of stars? She was supposed to be the embodiment of fairness. A judge, not a friend. Not a child haunted by memories of laughter and fishing lines tangled in reeds. But every time she looked at Malik, really looked, those memories clawed back. She remembered the last time she saw him, standing on her porch, eyes filled with questions she never answered. She walked away then, because she was told to, because obedience was easier than resistance, because the future she'd been groomed for had no room for a black boy from the edge of town. But now he was back. Not as the boy she left behind, but as a man broken by 1,000 small injustices, each one harder to fix than the last. Rachel clenched her fists beneath the bench, her nails digging in her palms, trying to anchor herself. She had to be objective. That was her job, her duty. But her heart had started whispering something different. The whisper turned into a roar later that afternoon. When she returned to her chambers, and found a file waiting on her desk. It was supposed to be standard background information, a routine check to better understand the defendant's circumstances. But one small note, scribbled in the corner of a report from his public defender, stopped her cold. Defendant has a daughter, age 7, lives with neighbor, sends weekly letters and drawings to father in county jail. No known relatives available for full custody. Rachel's fingers trembled as she lifted the page. Tucked between the lines was a copy of one of those drawings. Crayons on wrinkled paper, a stick figure with curly hair, a small house, a big sun. The words, "I love you, Daddy," written in shaky handwriting and surrounded by hearts. She swallowed hard. This wasn't evidence. This wasn't part of the trial. But it was real. More real than any video footage. More real than any legal argument. That little girl didn't know anything about plea deals or burdens of proof. She just knew her father wasn't home. And every week, she reminded him, and now Rachel, what he meant to someone. The air in her office grew thick. She leaned back in her chair, pressing the drawing to her chest, as if trying to absorb the innocence it held. Could she truly say she was blind to Malik's pain and still call herself just? Could she ignore the weight of history, the scars of a broken system, and tell herself this was just another defendant? She wanted to believe in justice. But now she had to ask herself, whose version? The one printed in law books? Or the one written in crayon, with hearts drawn around a father's name? As the afternoon sun spilled through her office window, painting gold across the desk, Rachel knew one thing for sure. This case wasn't just about guilt or innocence anymore. It was about who got the benefit of the doubt and who had to earn it over and over again. It was about whether compassion had a place in the courtroom. And most of all, it was about whether she had the courage, after all these years, to finally stop walking away. Just when it seemed like the case was tightening around Malik Carter like a noose, something happened that no one, not the prosecution, not the defense, not even Rachel Moore, could have predicted. The trial was dragging into its third day. The tension was suffocating. Every argument felt like déjà vu, circling the same grainy footage, the same shaky testimony, the same unspoken assumptions. Even the jury looked exhausted, their expressions caught between confusion and quiet resignation. And then Erica Blake stood up, her voice cutting through the courtroom like a scalpel. "Your Honor," she said, "the defense would like to call a new witness. One we were only able to locate late last night." The courtroom stirred. The prosecutor looked up, already ready to object. "A homeless witness?" He scoffed under his breath. "Desperate much." Rachel didn't blink. "Proceed, Ms. Blake." The doors opened, and a man stepped forward, clothes rumpled, shoes worn down to the sole. His name was Thomas Keller, and if society had a category for invisible people, he would fit neatly into it. He looked fragile, like life had sanded him down to the bone. But his eyes were sharp, observant, sober. He was sworn in, and then Erica began. "Mr. Keller, where were you on the night of October 9th? "I was sleeping behind the dumpster next to the convenience store," he said without shame. "I got a bad hip, can't walk too far. That alley's dry, and the clerk lets me take expired sandwiches sometimes." "And did you witness anything unusual that night?" He nodded. "Heard yelling. Peeked around the corner. Saw a kid run out. Real fast. Slim, young. Maybe 20s. Wearing red. Not this man." He pointed to Malik. "Not even close." A hush fell over the courtroom. Rachel sat straighter. "Mr. Keller, are you certain?" "Judge," he said, addressing her directly, "when you live on the streets, you notice things. You have to. People don't see me, but I see everything. That man didn't do it." The prosecutor tried to chip away at his credibility, his lack of ID, his inconsistent housing, but Thomas held firm. Every question thrown at him bounced off like water on stone. Then Erica called her next witness. A woman in a blazer stepped forward, rolling a metal case behind her. She was introduced as Dr. Lila Fenwick, a digital forensic analyst. Calm, clinical, the kind of person who didn't speak unless she had facts to back it up. She had reviewed the store's surveillance footage, and what she found cracked the case wide open. "This footage has been altered," she said, clicking through her slides. Specifically, the timestamp was modified. Frame data is missing. Compression patterns suggest it was re-exported from editing software, not pulled directly from the DVR. Rachel felt her breath catch. "You're saying the video was doctored?" Erica asked. "Yes, and in its current state, it cannot be considered reliable evidence." The courtroom erupted. Murmurs turned to gasps. Even a few jurors sat up straighter, eyes wide with unease. Rachel slammed her gavel. "Order in the court." But inside, she felt the same shock rising as everyone else. Until now, the prosecution had leaned entirely on that video. The case had been built like a house of cards, and someone just kicked the foundation. Erica turned toward the jury, her voice low but unwavering. "You've now heard from two witnesses, one who saw the crime unfold, and another who proves the key evidence may have been deliberately manipulated. So I ask you, what are we really looking at here? The truth? Or a convenient story wrapped in just enough fear to make us stop asking questions?" Rachel glanced at Malik. He sat straighter now, like for the first time in a long time. He could breathe again. The tide was shifting, and for the first time since the trial began, hope didn't feel like a betrayal. It felt like a possibility. The courtroom had grown eerily still, not silent in the usual procedural way, but quiet like a held breath. An entire room frozen in anticipation, not sure what was about to come next. Judge Rachel Moore glanced over the rim of her glasses as Erica Blake turned to her client and gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. Then Malik Carter rose from his seat. Chains clinked softly as he walked to the witness stand. It wasn't the sound of guilt, it was the sound of weight, of history, of a life lived under the constant hum of suspicion. He was offered the oath, swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but. And then he spoke. "My name is Malik Carter," he began, his voice steady, though the microphone picked up the slight tremble in his breath. "I know what most of you probably think when you hear that name, when you see me standing here, wearing this jumpsuit. The record, the past, the file with all the numbers and dates and decisions I made, some of them bad, sure. But what you don't see are the decisions that were made for me, before I even had a chance. No one moved, not a cough, not a shuffle." Malik's eyes scanned the jury, not pleading, not searching for sympathy, just meeting them where they were. "I've been judged my whole life, not in courtrooms. I'm talking about the everyday kind. The way people look at you when you walk into a store. The way cops slow down when they see you on the sidewalk. The way employers pretend your application got lost." He paused, exhaling slowly, as if steadying the weight of the moment. "I'm not here to make excuses. I've made mistakes. I've trusted the wrong people. I've gotten angry when I should have kept my mouth shut. But I didn't do this. And I won't sit here and pretend I did, just because it's easier to believe I'm the kind of man who would." His voice grew quieter, not weaker, more intimate, more real. "I'm not asking for pity. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for something a lot simpler than that." He leaned forward slightly. "I'm asking to be heard." The words hung in the air, sharp and soft all at once. "I've spent years feeling like a ghost in my own life, like I was sentenced long before I ever stepped into a courtroom. And it's not just me. It's a whole generation of people who got handed the short end and then told to prove they deserve better. I've done what I could. I've tried. God knows I've tried." He looked down at his hands. "Calloused, steady, strong. Every week, my daughter sends me a picture. Little hearts, stick figures, sons with faces." His voice cracked just slightly. "She doesn't see the criminal record. She just sees her dad. And all I want, all I've ever wanted, is to be that man she thinks I am." His eyes turned toward Rachel, just for a moment. "I'm not asking you to erase the past. I'm just asking you not to add one more lie to it." The room was still. The kind of stillness that only follows truth, the kind that commands respect, not from authority, but from shared humanity. A juror wiped at her cheek. Another stared at the floor, jaw clenched. Rachel felt something tighten in her chest. Not regret, not even guilt, just something raw, something real. The part of her that had buried Malik Carter years ago was now face to face with the man he'd become and the voice he had reclaimed. There was no more evidence to submit. No more objections to raise. Just a man who had spent his life being silenced, finally speaking. And for once, the system had no choice but to listen. The jury filed back in with heavy steps, each one echoing against the marble floors like a slow, deliberate drumbeat. Judge Rachel Moore sat motionless behind the bench, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, as if willing herself to stay still. From the outside, she looked composed, stoic even, but on the inside, her heart was a ticking clock. Time stretched. Malik Carter stood beside his attorney, wrists loosely shackled, shoulders square. He didn't glance toward the jury. He didn't need to. He'd stood in too many rooms like this, where strangers whispered his fate behind closed doors. But this time felt different. Not safer. Not fairer. Just different, like maybe, finally, someone had listened. The forewoman cleared her throat, unfolding a piece of paper with trembling fingers. In the case of the state of Louisiana versus Malik Carter, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, we find the defendant not guilty. There was a moment of silence. Not shock, not celebration, just silence. Then the sound of a sharp inhale. A few quiet gasps. A shuffle of feet as people turned, uncertain whether they should applaud or simply exhale. Malik didn't move. His jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the floor in front of him, as if trying to ground himself before the ground moved again. There was no fist pump, no smile. Just the stillness of a man who had weathered 1,000 storms and knew that surviving wasn't the same as winning. The bailiff unlocked his cuffs. The chain slipped away without fanfare. He was free, but he didn't look it. Rachel watched as Malik stepped aside to sign his release papers. She could have stood, could have disappeared into her chambers like so many judges do when the verdict is read. But something kept her there, rooted in her chair, as if this moment required her full attention. Not as a judge, but as a human being. He turned to her on his way out. Stopped. For a long beat, they just stared at each other. Two lives, two choices, two people who had once shared a childhood and now shared something even more fragile. A truth reclaimed after years of silence. You don't owe me anything, he said quietly, his voice rough but honest. Rachel's lips parted. She wasn't sure what to say. Malik glanced toward the empty seats in the gallery, then back at her. This world's never been fair to people like me, he said, voice low. But at least today, someone told the truth out loud. He nodded once, then walked away. No backward glance. No fanfare. Just a quiet exit through heavy doors toward a life that wouldn't magically fix itself, but would, for the first time in years, truly belong to him. Rachel remained in the courtroom long after everyone else had gone. The reporters had packed their bags. The clerks had shut their files. The last echo of footsteps had faded into the evening. She sat alone, staring at the bench before her. The gavel beside her hand looked smaller than usual, less like a symbol of authority and more like a tool that could build or destroy depending on the hand that wielded it. Malik's words echoed in her mind. This world's never been fair to people like me. She had spent her career believing in the system, believing that if she just followed the rules, justice would emerge on the other side. But now she knew better. Justice wasn't just written in statutes and verdicts. It was found in courage, in honesty, in the willingness to look someone in the eye and admit that the system wasn't always just, but could be if people like her chose to make it so. That night, as she stepped outside into the cooling dusk, Rachel Moore made a vow, not in front of cameras or microphones, but deep within herself. She would no longer be the judge who simply followed the path laid out for her. She would be the one who carved new ones, who opened the doors, asked the hard questions, and refused to let silence stand in for justice. Because the law could punish, but only people could redeem.